Hello and welcome to Good Party Academy Live. I'm happy to be here with everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. You're tuning in for Rapid Response Playbook. This is focused on beating your opposition's attacks. We're going to talk all about all things crisis management and rapid response in a little bit here. Just want to give people plenty of time to be able to log in, get settled. In the meantime, feel free to drop in the chat where we can communicate with you throughout the call tonight. Where are you calling in from? And if you're running for office, what you're running for. So I'm going to go ahead and model this a little bit by just saying I'm Rob from goodparty.org in Maine. But I'd love to see where folks are tuning in from. And we'll probably give it about 2, maybe 3 minutes for people to get settled before we jump right into the programming. As a reminder, if you are on the desktop version of Zoom, at the bottom navigation bar, there's a button that says Q&A. You can click that at any time, and you'll be able to submit to a running list of questions, questions that we'll try to answer throughout the process. And if you want to chime in or share any of your thoughts throughout this, you can do that with the chat button. If you're watching this on Circle, feel free to comment your questions in the Circle chat. And we have one of our producers who is watching and is going to be making sure that we get those questions. And we love questions. We will answer them and try to work them into the presentation throughout the training today, as well as holding 15 minutes at the end. So good to see everybody. I see folks from Texas and from Virginia, a couple of people from Texas, it looks like. So 3 people from Texas, big Texan crowd here. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I see another person from Utah. I believe that's where our expert is also calling in from today, but I'll let him introduce himself in a moment. But to reiterate, today we're talking about rapid response. We're talking about crisis management and how to prepare for opposition attacks so you can stay proactive instead of being caught flat-footed and being reactive. Our goal here is for you to leave this training with a structured approach for preparation, for you to be able to implement best practices and strategies for responding to things in a quick and timely fashion, and also to be able to use some of goodparty.org's tools to do all of this. So without further ado, I want to introduce our expert. He's a member of the goodparty.org team, Nate Allen. Nate, why don't you go ahead and share a little bit about who you are, what you do here at goodparty.org, and some of your bona fides as a rapid response expert.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So my name's Nate. I'm a campaign success manager here at goodparty.org. So I work directly with our candidates, helping them, run their campaigns, get communications out the door. But before I landed here at Good Party, I've kind of worked all over the independent and alternative politics space. I've worked with burgeoning third parties and presidential efforts, but most recently landed here and have been here for almost a year now, which is really exciting. Really enjoying working with these local campaigns and excited to give you some advice on rapid response today.
Awesome. Well, I want to jump right into it because I know that there's a lot to cover. Why don't we start with understanding some of the foundations of rapid response? Why don't we begin with just defining that? It's a term that I think is very familiar for those of us who have worked in politics. But when we say rapid response, what do we really mean in a campaign context?
Yeah, so, at the bare bones, rapid response is just messaging under pressure. It isn't just about replying quickly to attacks, but it's also about having a proactive system in place already so that when those opposition attacks happen, you're not scrambling to put something together. You've already anticipated these likely attacks, you've prepared clear responses, and your team knows exactly how to execute them. And so I typically break this down into like a threefold foundation. The first is credibility. So that just means you don't make things up to defend yourself. You stick to the truth and the facts and the heart of your campaign. When voters see that you're, staying who you are, even under fire, you remain, fact first, it really builds that long-term trust with your campaign, can actually turn an attack into an opportunity. The next one is values. So you root every response in why you're running and what you stand for. That way, even when you're on defense, you're reinforcing your vision. So a good rapid response doesn't just swat away the attack, it tells voters something positive about your campaign. And the last one is discipline. So, just being consistent, staying on message, saying the same thing to a reporter on social media or at a town hall. Campaigns that kind of freelance their answers under pressure kind of end up eroding their credibility because you can have slightly different answers from different angles. And that doesn't just go for different moments when you're speaking, but also different people on your team. But at the end of the day, the important thing to recognize is that voters don't expect perfection. What they do expect is honesty and consistency. So if you can give them that in the middle of an attack, you don't just survive the moment, you often end up stronger than before.
Yeah, I like the way that you put that. Rapid response to me isn't just about firing back quickly. It's about having your house in order to begin with. It's about being able to tell the truth and then tie it back to why you're running so you don't go off script, essentially using it as an opportunity rather than treating it as just a crisis. So a lot of what gets you there, though, is preparation, right? So I'd love for you to talk about why it's so critical to anticipate opposition attacks before they happen and some of your advice for doing so.
Yeah, this is really the key to rapid response. So if you, wait until the attack lands, you're already on your back foot. Campaigns that anticipate are able to respond with clarity and confidence instead of just scrambling. So, three main reasons why anticipation matters. The first is speed. Attacks move fast, especially online. Misinformation can spread within hours, and anticipation lets you respond within those hours instead of waiting days to respond to formulate a response. So it often makes the difference between, nipping a story in the bud and letting it snowball before you actually have a chance. Next one is consistency again. So when you've already thought through your vulnerabilities, you can prepare short, values-based responses that your whole team knows how to use already, is ready for the moment. So that prevents a candidate or team members from saying one thing and a volunteer saying another and creating confusion or even distrust within the community because it doesn't sound like everyone's on the same page and has the same message. Last one is just strength. So anticipating really lets you flip those attacks into strengths. For example, if you know your opponents are going to call you inexperienced because you don't have political experience before, you can easily reframe that as I'm not part of the system that's failed us. I bring a fresh perspective. So the key there is that really turns this perceived weakness into a strength and changes the messaging entirely. The bottom line here is that anticipation isn't just defensive. Like Rob said, it's a very proactive approach. It's actually an offensive tool that allows you to show voters that you're disciplined, self-aware, and ready to lead.
I love that. It's kind of like verbal jujitsu. You're redirecting the opponent's momentum to your advantage, and the prep work seems super important, and it makes sense that it would be, right? It's like buying a fire extinguisher after the kitchen's already in flames. It's too late at that point, so you've got to get ahead of these things so you're not rattled when it's all happening. And there's a good bit of anticipation that you can do. You probably know some of the reasons that an opponent might try to attack you. So, when it comes to this rapid response work, um, how does it tie into overall campaign messaging and credibility?
Yeah, it's actually a great transition. So, as we've been saying, this is really a proactive thing, not a defensive thing. And the key point here is that you can treat rapid response as an opportunity to actually get your message out more, not just as a crisis. So, rapid response is where your message really gets tested in public. If your answers in a crisis sound exactly like your answers do on a normal day, the same words, same values, same priorities, voters see that as credibility. They see that as a consistent story and something cohesive about your campaign. There's legitimacy there as well. So a few key connections here. One of them is just message discipline. Your rapid response should treat your campaigns, one sentence value proposition, or in other words, your key tagline that communicates your platform. rather than inventing new ones in a crisis. That consistency across the press and social media and events is what actually builds that recognition across the campaign because you're saying the same things in every situation. The next is just trust signals. So, how you respond when that's fact first, it's transparent about what you know or don't know, it's accountable in your tone. That demonstrates the character that you've been talking about. Obviously, when you're running a campaign, you're trying to show why you're right for the job. Well, this gives you a good opportunity to do that. So, credibility isn't just a claim, it's a behavior under stress. And lastly, agenda control. A good response bridges from the attack back to your issues. So, for another example here, that claim is inaccurate. Here are the facts. And more importantly, here's what matters to families in our cities, safer streets and fair budgets. That's why my plan, etc. So you kind of get to, like Rob was saying, it's jujitsu. You get to turn it back around and focus on the vision that you actually have. Again, using this as an opportunity. So you can acknowledge the attack, but immediately return that and connect it back to the conversation of your vision. So when your rapid response echoes your core message, you turn a crisis into reinforcement. Voters think this person is consistent and authentic, even under pressure.
It kind of just hits me how much these crises can be an opportunity for you to really show what you're made of as a leader. When you take office, you're bound to bump into unexpected crises, and seeing how you manage these as a candidate is a really good audition for voters to see how you're going to handle these things when you're actually in office. The way that you react, the way that you sound when you're under fire, if you can make that sound the same as how it sounds when it's a sunny, wonderful day where everything's going right, it's how you prove out that credibility that you were talking about, Nate. Any other pieces that you would sum up into sort of bite-sized or practical advice for being proactive and kind of anticipating rapid response issues?
Yeah, so I think everything that we've gone over so far boils down into three key points. So if you're going to take anything away from this, this would be it. First off, rapid response is proactive, not reactive. The best campaigns have already thought through their vulnerabilities. The next one is just anchor every response in your values. So if an attack comes, use it to restate your why statement, your platform, your reason for running. And lastly, truth and consistency win at the end of the day. So voters don't expect that perfection, but they do expect that honesty that they can trust. So those would be the 3 points I drive home.
Awesome. Well, I would love for us to begin to get into common challenges and how to address them. For the many folks who are watching this, who are running as first-time candidates, what do you think that they should know about common opposition tactics that you've seen on campaigns? What did these people sign up for by way of scrutiny from their opponents?
Yeah, so these are normally going to fall into four basic buckets that you're going to see come from opposition. The first one is going to be personal attacks. So these are the ones that feel, most painful because they target you as a person, your past, your reputation, your family, your character, kind of the ugly ones. But they often twist facts. They take things out of context or dig something old up to make it sound fresh. The next one is just going to be on your policies. So opponents are going to try to paint your positions as extreme or dangerous or just not good for the city or not aligned. For example, they may take one sentence from your platform or one vote from your previous record and spin it into they're going to raise your taxes or they don't support public safety. The next one is fundraising attacks. So this can really go in either direction. Opponents may try to frame you as bought by interests, such as receiving donations from businesses in your area. Or if you're not raising money as much, claim that you're not viable because you can't fund a campaign. Next one is community rumors. These are whispers that spread in Facebook groups or in the community at the local diner, often not even directly from your opponent. So they can be just as damaging, though, as formal attacks because they spread quickly and kind of feel organic to voters. I think the key with all of these is just to recognize which one of those it is to start, because the right response does differ a little bit. a personal attack will often call for a short values-based response just to show that you're composed in the moment, like we've been talking about. A rumor might just need a quick fact check to, set the record straight. And a policy attack, that's usually an opportunity to pivot back to your vision and continue talking about the reason that you're running in the first place.
Yeah. I think that's helpful. Those four buckets are usually what these things break down into: that personal, the policy, money, or straight up rumors about a person. And once you know which drawer these different attacks belong to, you don't waste a ton of energy chasing them all over the place. And it's kind of like sorting laundry. There are just different ways that you treat different garments, right? Some things need a lot more care than others. I want to invite, I know that we've got folks who have dealt with personal attacks or who have dealt with opposition attacks already in their campaign journeys. And if you want to share some of those in the chat, we'd love to hear about some of what you're experiencing. We'll try to tailor bits of the advice that we give to that. But while we're waiting for a couple of those to come in, I do want to lift up a question that came from our Circle community. Kevin Moxley pointed out, Nate, he feels it's necessary to educate voters about his opponent, and he's worried about whether or not this would be taken as him attacking. So how can he handle his messaging in a way that won't necessarily be seen as an attack, but as a critique, and also to prepare for the rebuttal?
Yeah, so I think one of the key pieces here, a lot of people are worried about going negative in a campaign, and I think, for good reason, sometimes that can create a toxic campaign environment. But there really is a big difference between these personal attacks when you attack a person for who they are and try to put them down versus a genuine critique about their policy positions or records. If you can clearly point to bad outcomes that a decision a leader has made in the community, that is an attack, but it's not necessarily going negative. It's not a toxic campaign environment. That's fair game. It's part of the discussion, and yeah, if they're a good candidate as well, they're going to respond with the reason that they did that and their perspective. And if anything, that's just better for everyone in the race, the whole entire community, because it creates an open dialogue, discussions about the issues that are going to affect them.
Yeah, another question from the chat, and I think that this is one that a lot of folks who have experience in public office who are running as independents maybe would have to grapple with. And this questioning is about someone who ran as a Democrat, 16 years ago and is running as an independent now. They're worried about being attacked along those lines. And so for Liz, the candidate is asking, how do you talk about that decision to run as an independent? I think this is a perfect one where you can really pivot into it being a strength, but I'll let Nate take the approach on this one.
Yeah, there's a couple ways that you could respond to that. I think some of the most basics are that, times change and people change. But I think what Rob is referring to here is that, one of the largest voting blocks, if not the largest voting block in America right now, are people who are registered as independents. And there's a reason for that. The major two parties aren't delivering. And so the fact that you can say that you're part of that movement, that you're ready to represent those people, gives you even more legitimacy because it shows that you understand this disenfranchisement that people feel. You are part of that group and you're ready to actually represent them.
Awesome. Um, well, I want to keep us going. Something that I realized too is sort of rooted in that first question from Kevin Moxley. Um, there are some cases where saying nothing is sort of the right answer, right? So when do you think silence is the right response?
Yeah, I think, this can be one of the hardest calls to make in a campaign because naturally, when you get attacked, you want to defend yourself every time. But silence can actually be a strongest move if you use it wisely. So, some of the times when silence can be appropriate, first, the attack just isn't gaining traction. If it's one angry Facebook post with 5 likes, responding can actually just give it oxygen. It can create more of a conversation. So, even if you see that post and it hurts or it makes you angry, if it's not gaining traction, then it's not that big of a deal for your campaign at the end of the day. And you just have to remember that your goal as a candidate is to win this election. It isn't necessarily to fight back against every attack that you see. Next, if it's obviously false to most voters, sometimes responding can make you look defensive and even give legitimacy to the claim when people already see right through it. So if it's obviously false and most people are already writing it off, the best thing that you can do is show that you're just like them and that you're writing it off as well. You don't even need to address it. And then lastly, if it distracts from your core message, if answering would pull you into the weeds of some kind of response that your voters don't really care about, it's better to keep the focus on your priorities. So, keep doing your day-to-day campaigning, keep talking to voters, stay focused on your vision, connect with people in the community. That's ultimately going to matter more than a response to an attack in times like that. Um, but there is some nuance here. Silence doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing nothing. Behind the scenes, you should still, log that attack, monitor whether it's spreading, keep a drafted response ready if that's something that you weren't already prepared for. It can help you be more prepared in case it does gain traction. So think of it as a fire extinguisher. You don't spray every spark that happens, but you keep it close if a fire's growing.
Yeah, I have heard old timers up this way say something along the lines of you don't swat every fly. If you do, you'll tire yourself out.
Yeah.
And that's the same case here. Not every jab deserves that answer. And you said it perfectly. If it doesn't seem like it's taking root, then it's not necessarily something that you have to respond to. I'll give a plug here to our circle community that a lot of folks are watching on this evening. I just dropped a link to in the Zoom chat here. And I hold candidate office hours every Monday. And a number of times folks have come to those and just asked me for a snap reaction of, hey, how do I respond to this? And this is the type of thing that I love to game out with people and help to make the call whether or not to jump on something or if silence is sort of the right answer there. So if you're not a member of the Circle community already, this is a great opportunity for me to plug it to the folks who are watching along. Another question from the chat, Gina Posey says that her opponent has already received a lot of money from out of the county and from developers. And she's not going to come close when it comes to fundraising. How should she handle this? And I think specifically from a messaging standpoint, and Gina, I see the second half of this question about when will the 460 forms be made public about financial disclosures. I don't think we'll be able to answer that. You can follow up with your local municipal office, your county election board, to be able to get an answer to that. But it's different everywhere. But for Nate, what's your advice for messaging around an opponent who is raising a ton of money from mostly, it seems, out of county and corporate sources?
Yeah, well, I think, first it's most important to centralize the message around yourself. So being the people-centered, community-based candidate is a really powerful message that makes people who are voting for you actually resonate with you more. You have, every piece of transparency to show that you are being funded by people in the area and that you're running a campaign that will truly represent them. So I think that's going to be your most effective thing that you can run on. But if, it does come up or it feels necessary to point out, again, back to my critique earlier on, somebody who has policies or a voting record that you disagree with or might not represent the community, pointing out funding is also a similar thing. It's not necessarily a personal attack to say, it's a little bit concerning that this person is being funded by out of county resources and people who aren't actually even voting in this race, and just question, are they actually going to deliver for the voters and whether or not they're truly representative, or if they're in it for some other special interests.
Yeah. Well said. I think, again, while we're talking about limited resources, something that comes to mind is there are a lot of smaller campaigns that don't have, a dedicated comms director or much less sort of comms team. Any advice for these campaigns that are maybe just the candidate themselves or the candidate and one other person on how they can prepare?
Yeah, so most local campaigns don't have that communications director or even a team, and that really is okay. You don't need a full team. What you really need in these cases is just a system. So there are a few ways that we recommend smaller campaigns can set themselves up for success. First up, pre-assign roles. Decide now who's going to monitor for attacks, who's drafting responses, and who actually approves those responses. Sometimes that may just be, you or you and your partner or a friend or another family member who's volunteering, but this can work with a small team of just two or three people. But what's really most important is the clarity on those issues. It's more important than the size of your team. So without this, you'll waste precious hours debating who should do what. So have those pre-assigned roles set up in advance. The next thing is just drafting templates. So, take your top three vulnerabilities and write 2 sentence responses for each. You can, store them wherever is most convenient. You can even, use our campaign assistant on goodparty.org to help generate some of these responses. But have those ready in advance so that you can take those 2 sentence responses and, morph them to the specific situation. Lastly, it can be helpful to just run a drill. So set aside one evening to practice, have someone play opposition and post a fake attack, and then practice what it looks like to monitor responses, drafting them, approving, and actually posting your response as you formulate that. So even doing this once will build huge confidence with you when the real thing happens, because you already know what that's going to look like and you know what your plan is. So you'll feel a lot more comfortable and natural when the real thing happens. Lastly, smaller campaigns often assume that they're at a disadvantage here, but the truth is that they can actually be more agile than bigger, slower campaign machines. So you can respond quicker, you can, act more on your toes. With a few pre-planned moves, you can actually respond faster and more cleanly than your opponent who, might be trying to lodge a big attack and even has a lot of money.
Yeah, I think that prep work is really, really useful. I love there's an old messaging exercise called the Tully message box. That's essentially uh, 4 quadrants where you go through what do we say about ourselves? What do we think our opponent's going to say about us? What do we say about our opponent? What do we think our opponent is going to say about themselves? And you can do it for almost every issue on your campaign. And it really gets you in the mindset of, okay, we can all look at the same basic issue stance 4 different ways or present it 4 different ways. And that exercise, we have a lot of resources in our resource library. That's a really good one. Just to reiterate what Nate said, if you ask any AI, but especially the AI tools that we have, to role play a Tully message box where they take on the persona of your opponent and they fill out your boxes for you, that could be a really good way to prep for this. So I really like that. A question coming from the Zoom audience here. I'm curious about any advice for attacks that are sexist or racist in nature, in addition to the standard sort of attacks, especially now. I imagine that can feel especially threatening or destabilizing. So yeah, Nate, what are your advice pieces for responding to attacks that are coming your way that veer their way into hate speech?
Yeah, so using some of the frameworks that we've already set up here, this definitely falls into that personal attack bucket. And so obviously this is going to hurt. It's going to feel really dirty. But I think that more than anything, that shows the character of the person who's attacking you. And it really is an opportunity for you to, buckle down and be who you are, be proud of who you are. It doesn't matter what they're saying about you, what's true. And so you can actually use this as a way to emphasize your own personal values and build more trust and character of yourself in the public's view as they see how you handle that issue. And then again, if you're ready to respond, what you're going to do is turn that into a way to connect it back to your values, a way to connect back to why this community needs you as their leader. If your message is strongly on serving the community, there are going to be tons of people who are just like you and seeing the way that you respond to that attack professionally and showing that you're ready to represent them, and that can be a really big opportunity for you.
Yeah, I think this is one where you call it out. directly as well, and you call it out in no uncertain terms. And I think it's a good way to share and reflect the values of the people you're trying to represent. Where it's like that's a really ugly thing to say, and it doesn't reflect the values. Racism and sexism doesn't reflect the values of the town that I'm trying to represent. And I hope that they'll vote that way and vote for the candidate who stands up for their shared values. That'd probably be something along the lines of how I would respond to that. Um, let's talk mistakes. We've talked about some of the best practices. What are some of the common mistakes that you see teams make, and what's your advice on how to avoid that?
Yeah, so a few common mistakes. One of them is just chasing down every rumor. So similarly to what we talked about earlier, where something's not gaining traction, you don't want to chase down every rumor and feel completely spread thin. So, triage what's important, respond only if it's spreading credible or values based. Next up is over explaining. So keep it to two sentences plus a proof point. So show your evidence, fact based. Link out for details if you need. So if you need to link to an article of you saying something that's counter what the opponent is claiming you said, that can be effective. But it can't, again, just keep it short and simple. Keep your response to the point. And then lastly, inconsistent surrogates. So again, you don't want your team saying vastly different things than you're saying and a volunteer saying something else, and or even just saying different messages in different places. Use a one message, a central message document so that everyone pulls that same line and knows what to say in each circumstance, no matter who they're talking to or when. A couple of things that also kind of frame as these challenges, but can be like turned into this practical advice and lessons. One challenge is just that emotional reaction. So candidates can feel attacked and want to fire back instantly. So the fix is just really, pause, verify the facts, and align with your messaging guide before you actually respond. Next is limited resources. Without staff, things can fall through the cracks, but if you have those pre-assigned roles that we talked about earlier, even a small team can know exactly what to do and who's doing what in a situation like this. Lastly is amplification risk. So over responding can make those small attacks bigger. Just evaluate how much of the community this attack is already reaching before you engage. So again, a lot of this is just pausing and trying to assess the situation for a minute before you just jump into responding. And lastly, just driving home that inconsistency again, when people, are freelancing their responses, it can cause all sorts of chaos. So centralize those talking points into a single library.
Awesome. Um, and in terms of it's just basic practical advice, any additional pieces, takeaways that you want people to have?
Yeah, I mean, I think mainly are those key things I just ran through. So emotional reaction is just something that you really want to be wary of. Notice when you're feeling those emotions and actually respond aptly to the situation based in facts. Stay composed. And a lot of times having those responses ahead of time can actually give you a really good jump on being able to do that. So you already have, those two lines in your head that you're ready to respond with. And then, just again, driving home, be consistent, pre-assign those roles and just look for responses that actually need, or look for attacks that actually need a response is really one of the biggest things.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about really breaking this down into step-by-step frameworks. If I'm one of the candidates who's watching this presentation tonight and I get that attacks are coming and I get that there are pitfalls, what's the actual framework that I should be using to handle rapid response work? What's like the big takeaway that people should bring? Like this is the time to have their pen out and their notebook to take notes.
Yeah, so in this response, like we're just going to zoom out a little bit and look at this as a five-step cycle of the whole campaign and how like creating your rapid response playbook actually looks. So again, first up is anticipate. So at the very beginning of the campaign, sit down with your team, map your top three vulnerabilities. Is it your background, a lack of political experience, a specific policy stance, and write them down so there's no surprises. You already are starting to think about what you might be attacked on. Now that you have those written down, step two is just to prepare. So draft two or three responses for each attack area. A couple of sentences each. These aren't essays; they're short, value-based pivots. So really get to the point, the meat of the issue. Read directly from your platform, your issues, the character that you're putting out into the community, and then store them in a message grid like Rob was talking about. That's accessible to your whole team. Next up is assign. So again, you're going to assign who's responsible for what, decide ahead of time who's going to be monitoring, drafting, and approving in the middle of those crises. When you're in the middle of that, it's the worst time to debate who has the pen and who's going to be responding and approving. Think that all through ahead of time and know who's actually going to draft those responses based on your pre-prepared points. Step number four is just act. So, once an attack is gaining traction, respond within 24 hours. Another rule of three here, respond quickly, stay consistent, and repeat your message across at least three channels. So don't just post on social media, but try to go to the press and response as well. And also talk directly to supporters. So if you're at an in-person event, or let's say you're door knocking and somebody asks you a question as you're out, be ready to respond to those types of things in person directly to people who support you and everyday voters. And then the last thing, importantly, is just to track. So don't just move on, log that attack, log your response, track whether that issue fizzled, escalated, or created new opportunities, and use that data to refine your playbook for next time. So you're really trying to understand how your responses played and how you might improve them, or if they did really well, keep those in your back pocket.
Awesome. So that's a really clean framework there, basically 5 steps. Let's start with anticipate, prepare, assign, act, and then track. And I think that's as good a playbook for game day as any, where you won't be, drawing up plays in the middle of a huddle. I'm gonna drop that into the chat for people. And while I do that, I'm hoping that Nate, you can talk a little bit about some of the biggest mistakes to avoid when building and actioning against that 5-point plan.
Yeah, so there are a few common traps, and again, you're going to start recognizing that we're repeating a lot of things, but they really do plug into a lot of these areas. So specifically for this, you don't want to ignore issues until it festers. So be ready to act, but also be prepared. Silence can be misread as guilt. If it's something that really is spreading, then it is time to act. And so that fits back into that 24-hour playbook on step number 4 of act. Next is over explaining. Those long defensive answers can make you look shaky. If it seems like you're rambling and scrambling to put something together, it can make it seem like you weren't prepared, or make, again, even add fire to the claim because it can make it seem like you're not confident. So this goes right back to that prepare step. So, just short, clear responses land better. So be ready to explain quickly and consistently. Next one is going negative. So if your whole campaign becomes about attacking your opponent back or attacking them in the first place, you lose your own identity. Voters want to see somebody who is ready to campaign on their own issues, that has their own character in the race. So, be ready to pivot back to your issues when you get attacked. Be ready to say that tagline in, everyday campaign situations or when you're being attacked as well. So avoid trying to go overly negative. Lastly is changing that message midstream. So as we've mentioned, pick your line, stick with it, stay consistent, have everybody say the same thing in every situation, whether that's on social media, to the press, to voters, on your website, whatever it is. Consistency matters more than trying to come up with a quippy response in the moment. When people see that you are steadfast on the issues and steadfast on your policy, they recognize that you are about something that's bigger than yourself. So resist that urge to try to fight back with something clever. It doesn't need to be the best response. What it needs to be is consistent and show that you are who you are no matter what you're doing. And that really messages that you are ready to lead. So, at the end of the day, if you keep your responses concise, consistent, value driven, don't over explain, avoid trying to be overly negative, but be ready to respond. You don't just neutralize those attacks, you have to actually come out looking stronger than before. So, the biggest message here, to wrap all of that up is just be ready to respond. That makes you look proactive. It turns these attacks into opportunities to show who you are. It increases the effectiveness of your campaign rather than being a crisis moment.
Awesome. I'd love to see this really in action. So we've talked theory, we've talked about the 5 different steps to this, and we've talked about some of the mistakes that people make. I want to see this in action. So I'll give you kind of a scenario where there's a city councilor and they get hit with the line that I think a lot of independent candidates get hit with. You just don't have enough experience. What do they do in that situation to apply this framework? What does that look like?
Yeah, like you said, this is really a classic response, but luckily there are some really good ways to turn this into those proactive opportunities. So instead of just listing off your resume, I've been on this position and I've done this job for 20 years, lean on a prepped pivot. So those 2 lines that you've already produced can go something like this. Voters don't want more politicians, they want results. I bring a fresh perspective. I know the challenges our community faces, and I'm committed to solving them. So that's it. 2 sentences, but you can feel the weight and the power in that response. It completely flipped the script. It appealed right back to the community and why this actually matters to them. People want something new. So you can repeat that line in a debate, a press interview. You can put that on your website in response. It can be on social media. But by having that prepared, it allows you to stay consistent. And so an attack like that not only fizzles in response, but it actually turns that into a strength of your campaign. So in a moment where you might feel like you need to be on your back foot, all of a sudden you're actually turning this into an opportunity and you're actually gaining strength as you run your campaign.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Um, uh, Gina, I see you asking, can you repeat his response here? I want to capture. Oh, you mean in the chat? Drop the response. Yeah, absolutely. We can add that as a note there. This call will also be recorded, so you can watch it back when we post it. Well, great. I appreciate that answer. I want to take a pause for just a moment here and ask our team to go ahead and put up our survey about the value of this call for attendees. Um, and I also want to open up a call for question and answer. We're going to do about 15 minutes worth of Q&A and answer as many questions as folks have, both on Circle and also questions that people have in the chat here. And while we are pulling those up, I see a short queue of questions down here at the bottom. I am going to go ahead and drop for Gina. Just pulled that from the transcript. But Nate, let's dig into another question from the audience here. This one comes from Kelly in Pennsylvania. Kelly asks, what's the most effective way to deflect badgering questions?
Yeah, so I think when you're, at a debate or candidate forum and a bunch of questions are coming at you once or all at the same time, they're not letting you respond. Um, it goes back to some of these consistent values of just being able to stick to your message. So if someone's coming at you a bunch with a specific, question, you can answer it. And if they come at you again, continue to tie it back consistently to the issues that you're running on, the values of your campaign and the platform. If you consistently do that, like we've been saying, it gives you that clear identity. It gives that clear character as you're running and shows who you are in those moments. But it also shows that you actually care about the community. And even when somebody's attacking you, you're staying calm under pressure and you're staying on message. You're not getting flustered. You're not, biting on some of the bait that they're trying to drop. So, if anything, it can make them look even, less professional because they continue to try to attack you or cut you off, and you're consistently staying on message.
Awesome. So a lot of good reiterating of some of the themes from the call. Another question from Ricky in Maryland. Ricky asks, understanding your opposition, um, should we exploit negative issues about our opposition? What's the fine line to walk with criticism and with attacks? And I'll tee up. I think the most important thing with um, drawing contrast and with critique is just keeping it grounded in the facts, especially if you're running against an incumbent. You can really use their voting record, things that are just indisputable. They voted 4 times against raising the minimum wage, or they voted for it, depending on what your stance is. But what you have to do is avoid ad hominem attacks. That's at the core of being able to draw contrast in a healthy way. Nate, what do you think? What are some ways that you can, make the most or kind of hit at your opponent without hitting below the belt?
Yeah, I think that's the exact line that I would draw as well. It's again that line between a personal attack and something about their policy stance, their voting record, their fundraising sources. All of those types of things have clear facts that you can point to. They have clear values that can be, starkly different from the things that you're running on. And they're very clear ways to draw contrast. They're things that they have obviously been public about already. So it's not like you're exposing them, putting out something personal about them. You're really just pointing out something that they've done, and have been comfortable doing publicly or as part of their campaign. And so by doing that, you get to show a stark contrast between who you are and who they are. It's not a way to put them down. It's not a way to hurt them or try to make them look bad. It's just a way to show that there is a difference between you and them and appeal to the voters and their own values on who they would actually want to pick in that situation. In other words, you're doing the voters a favor by giving them more context of the race so that they can make an informed decision. And that is massively different than attacking someone's, personal experiences or part of their identity. Those types of things are, as Rob said, below the belt, and those can be really negative, and that's what creates this toxic environment that a lot of people don't like about politics. But if all campaigns just ran on stark contrast between what that person actually represents and what you represent, we'd have a lot healthier of an environment.
Yeah, well said. Deborah in Colorado asks, do you recommend speaking your truth or staying middle of the road? And I think this is really similar to the last question, where it's again, like, at what point do you come in and hit heavy? And I think the way that I want to refocus this one for you, Nate, is let's say something is really dropped in your lap. Your opponent makes a big mistake or is caught doing something illegal, for example, or there are accusations of them doing something illegal. How do you best position those things? What does the due diligence process look like? I don't think we talked a lot about sort of how do you prep to go on the offensive with people, and sometimes rapid response is responding to the news in the world and opportunities like that. So we talked a lot about defense and how to turn it into offense, but can you talk a little bit about just good old fashioned offense and how to do that without overcommitting to something that you might then have to walk back later?
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing that you're hinting at here is verifying the truth of a claim. Something can come out, someone can be accused of something, or social media posts can go viral. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily true. And even if it seems like it might be a good opportunity to put your opponent down and boost your own campaign, it can actually be a really bad mistake to jump on something when it comes out that it was not true later on, and can make it look like you weren't prepared to actually check the truth and really were just looking for personal attacks to put people down. So definitely, verify legitimacy of claims. And I do think that one thing where if there are accusations about something, but there still needs to be an investigation, you can put out a response or a post on social media that just says, we're against this type of behavior. That's not something that I condone. But if there is, no clear way that we know that this person actually did that, then you might not name them specifically, but you can still stake out your stance on the issue and show who you are and what your character is.
Yeah, great response to that. How do you handle it when your opponent creates fake social media accounts to slam you on social media? This comes from Trey in Georgia. And Trey, I'm sorry to hear that they got the bots coming after you. Nate, this is, I think, a great example probably of the last question in action. Yeah, can you talk about what you would do if you had a suspicion that your opponent was creating fake social media accounts to slam you on socials?
Yeah, well, a lot of times some of these things can seem very clear and obvious to us what's going on, but it is something that's very hard to prove. And so by, going and responding and saying my opponent's making bots and look at all of these fake accounts, it can easily be turned around on you and say they're just assuming that. It's almost like a bait that you might actually want to avoid. I think what's most important in these circumstances is to go back to some of our earlier advice here, where are these claims actually gaining traction? Is it making a difference? If it's really just one person posting all of these things, maybe it's not getting a lot of attention and it doesn't really matter to respond. You may feel angry about it. You may feel like you want to defend yourself. But if at the end of the day it isn't hurting your campaign, then maybe you don't respond to it. And if these claims, are hurting your campaign and they are gaining traction, you can still use some of these earlier advices of being prepared for those types of things, knowing how to respond. If it is a clearly false claim, you can just simply treat it as a rumor and set the record straight and pivot back to your issues. So showing that, again, you are a professional, you have a response prepared, you're ready to stay on message. That shows people that you're above all of these, petty attacks coming from all angles, and that you're actually ready to lead, you're ready to be a good example and stay focused on what your mission actually is.
Well put. This question comes out of the chat from Gina. Gina says that her county has 5 different districts in it, and her opponent is running as if the job that they're being elected to is to oversee all sorts of countywide issues, like approving big housing projects instead of focusing on representing the district that she's actually in, which is mostly rural. And they're asking for advice on how they can explain that difference simply, or sort of use that to create a sense of contrast. And I'd love to take a stab at this one first and then let Nate take a swing as well. I'd probably say something along the lines of our county has 5 districts for a reason, and each one deserves its own voice. And while my opponent is focused on pushing out countywide projects in the far-flung cities, I'm running to represent the people in my district, where we're rural, where we're unique, and I'm trying to solve the problems of the farmers, of the people who actually live here. That would be how I would draw contrast. It's not enough to say what they are doing. You also have to say what you would do different, and create that sort of clear sense of, I want to be a champion for the people who are in this district. And even better, like you, Gina, will know the specific problems that your neighbors and the people who live in your district are facing. If you can name one of those explicitly, and say, while they're focused on building houses three districts away, we're I want to hear about what they're going to do for the farmers who are losing their subsidies, whatever the issue is. And I think that that's how you make a really memorable bit of contrast. Nate, anything to tap in on that one?
I'm gonna let that stand. That was an excellent response. I think the one key thing to point out in what you said was again that you really focused on what Gina's issues are, and pulling that back into the community. When people see that stark contrast that you drew, they're going to actually resonate with the fact that you are focusing on the issues that affect them, and they're going to see clearly that you're the candidate that is thinking about them, in that district rather than the county as a whole.
Mhm. So another question from Circle, this one coming from Shalaya. Shalaya asks, how does one counter an attack that a candidate should not point out wrongdoings by the currently elected folks? With people saying that the attack is so small, essentially. People are saying it's too small to criticize. Any advice for again, for a candidate who's looking for advice on whether or not they should weigh in?
Yeah, well, I'm assuming if this critique has already been lodged, that there is some legitimacy to it, that it has affected people. If it's something that has been brought up, then that is a real effect that it's had on people and voters in the area. So I think saying that it is too small almost minimizes the lived experiences of people in the district. And so you can genuinely respond and say, is somebody's life too small to actually be talking about this because this affected me in this real way, or this affected somebody I know in this real way, and that's why we're talking about it. And I think that our leaders should have the best interests of our voters in mind, and be ready to talk about these issues if it is affecting us.
Yeah, I think if somebody was punching back at you for pointing out uh, a something that the current administration had done and saying, let it slide, I might use that as an opportunity to frame it as, if folks in charge can get away with these small things, it opens up the door for bigger ones. And I value integrity. Shalaya is, I know really well from the community, is a Marine, and Marines value integrity, and integrity doesn't come in sizes. It's either there or it isn't. And I think that that is something that you can tie both to your personal experience as a way to, again, highlight your history of service, and also call out the lack of integrity of the people who are saying, hey, look away on this small issue. So you're not nitpicking, you're elevating, and you're calling on people to do better. And that would be how I would try to frame that up. I hope that's helpful. Well, I believe we've made it through all of the questions that I saw in the question queue. I want to go ahead and take a moment to thank all of you for joining us this evening and for being a part of this training. I want to thank Nate for his expertise. And I want to give Nate the floor to basically give us final thoughts or sort of key summaries around today's training. But before I do that, I'll also ask our producers to drop a link to the next training, which is going to be all about get out the vote. It is get out the vote time, and also to drop a link for joining our Circle community, where we have a ton of free resources. We have a bunch of different ways that you can practice these trainings, and a number of courses that you can use to be able to level up your skills with rapid response and every other part of campaigning. And it's all totally free. So Nate, without further ado, wrap us up, buddy.
Yeah, well, thanks again, everyone, for coming. The few points that I would drive home are some of these things that we've reiterated over and over. First up, rapid response is proactive, not reactive. So the best campaigns have already thought through their vulnerabilities and have something prepared in advance. Anchor every response that you have in your values, who you are, pivot back to your vision. That's always the most important thing, is that you stay consistent. And lastly, just, that consistency, that truth really matters. Voters don't expect you to be perfect. What they do expect is honesty, and they want to see how you handle things under pressure, that you can stay composed when an attack comes in. So be prepared, know when to respond, and you'll be set up for success in a campaign with any attack that comes your way.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. We will see you in 2 weeks for our Get Out the Vote training. This is one that I would definitely recommend coming to. Get Out the Vote is perhaps the most important part of your campaign. It is taking all that hard work that you've done throughout the launch and throughout the voter contact phase of your campaign, and it's turning it into the votes that will hopefully win you your election. And we will see you in 2 weeks. Good night, everybody.